Hey everyone. I noticed something. Um, when you do a podcast solo, like I've been doing, you've got nothing to fill up the time if you don't come up with it. For example, if somebody has a guest on, right, they can just let the guest talk and take up time. Um, I know some of the podcasts that I listen to have more than one person on them. There's some that are solos like me, but there are some that have more than one person on. Uh, as the normal. Not even just when they have guests. This is just their normal group. It's a group podcast, and it lets you bounce things off of other people. It lets you expound upon things a little bit more, and it lets you get multiple perspectives. In addition, it means you're not taking up the entire time yourself, which is probably why my podcasts are short. Plus, I like to make them short and sweet so that you can listen to these and still have time for everything else. That said, coming up with topics sometimes can be difficult, but this is photography. And if you limit yourself to just what people might think of as a photography topic, like aperture setting or f-stop, what model camera to use, you run out of topics after a certain point, right? I mean, we haven't had a lot of new cameras in a while. So you just run out of topics. But there is so much more to photography and the way to look at the world and the way that photographers have a tendency to look at the world completely differently than other people. I know this. It's just that photographers have a different view on the world. Sometimes we see things as snapshots, and sometimes we just look at things differently. I have a couple of security cameras out front pointed at a bird feeder. And just being able to go through that frame by frame and seeing a bird in flight, something we would die to capture just straight off the camera. But because this is a motion camera and it's basically just a series of frames that play quickly to make it look like it's moving to us, it's great. You can see a bunch of things that you can't normally see by going through frame by frame. So I highly encourage you, if you find a video that you can do that with, stop it, flip it frame by frame and take a look at the details. Take a look at all the little things that change that you may not see because everything went by. And again, we all have a perception bias. And that is, we expect things to be there that we saw there before. I think I've mentioned this before about, you're used to the keys always being in the basket by the door. You go to reach for the keys and you could have sworn you saw them there. Well, your mind filled that in. And as photographers, we have a tendency, not always, but we have a tendency to see things that changed, to notice that before other people, and to see things that are different before other people. So hone those skills. Don't let them go to waste. But the other thing to think of this time of year is we have a lot of snow here in Vermont. It's actually stuck around, which has been wonderful. We've had days where we've had snow one day and it's all gone the next. And I do not like mud and green in the winter. I want to see life, or I want to see snow. I love the colors of autumn. I love all the vibrancy and growing of spring and summer. But if it's going to be winter and everything's going to be dead, I want it covered in snow. I just want to see the snow. But what the snow does for us as a photographer is it gives us the world's largest reflector, right? I don't know if you've used reflectors when you do photography. If you haven't, it's a way of taking some of the ambient light around you and bouncing it back onto your subject. And you can do it in white, which is kind of stark, gives you a good contrast. There's also gold reflectors and some other colors, but the gold gives you that almost a golden hour glow to your subject. And A lot of people will use a reflector to bounce light up so that they don't have the darkness under the under the orbit of the eye or under the chin. But the other thing you can do with that is you can just use that as your light source, right? Take your person out of the sunshine, put them in shade, but move your reflector so that they're in the sun, and use the reflector with that golden color to it to bounce that onto the person. Instant golden hour, right? And that comes down to why there's gels for flashes and gels to cover lights and material that you can put over your light so that it changes color. But if you want to learn how to use a reflector and you don't have one, winter is a great time because you have this massive reflector underneath everybody's feet. Put somebody where there's nothing but snow around them and take some pictures. See how the sun changes everything because the sun is bouncing off the snow up onto them. So rather than having a shot where the ridge over the eyes is causing shadows into the eyes, you have all this snow bouncing the light up and reflecting around and adding so much more to your image. Bear in mind, all right, this is good to remember for summer too, when the sun's brighter, it's going to be pretty bright out there, right? So you don't want to be staring at the snow. Some people go snowblind, and you don't want your subject out into that for too long either, looking around in bright sunlight in the snow. But you can do it for a bit of time and get a feel for what it's like to use a reflector. Or just grab something that you can take pictures of and put it in the snow and see how it changes things. Especially if you've got something that has a over bridge to it. For example, a big hat. If somebody has a big hat on, their face could be completely in shadow, but not when they're outside with that reflector underneath them, bouncing the light up from the ground into their face. It's now changed the direction of those light rays, and now you can see their face. And this will give you some practical applications that you can think of to use later on when you have a reflector, or in the summer if you want to take pictures. Now, taking somebody's picture in direct sunlight in the winter is a little bit softer than it is in high summer. But it still can wash out somebody pretty good. And keep that in mind when you're taking these. Now, again, if you've got somebody and you've got a shady spot that you can put the person in, remember, because you've got the snow underneath them, that snow's still going to bounce up into that shady spot. So you may still be able to get a fantastic picture from them without them being in the sun and without the harshness of the sunlight coming down on top of them. Kind of a bounced up reflector, taking that light and bringing it up from the ground to their face and to their body. And you could do some really creative things with that if you think about it. I mean, you could put somebody in really serious shade, but they're not in shade because of the snow bouncing up. You can do the exact same thing with a reflector. So this allows you to get some free practice to figure out what you want to do and how you'd like to do it. And then when you go get a reflector, and reflectors are usually pretty inexpensive. There's a caveat to reflectors we'll get to in a sec. But you can see what it would be like in case, instead of it being a white light coming up at them, what if it's a golden light? What if it's blue? What other color could you use to reflect on them? Which then gets into what you can use for lighting and for flashes and things. But just like for lighting flashes, the caveat with a reflector is what's going to hold it in place. All right, so you got to keep that in mind. Right now, you don't have to worry about that because you've got the snow as a reflector just laying on the ground, and you can use that to bounce the light up onto your subject. Cool. You could even pack it around if you wanted to, make patterns and things like that with the snow, bank it in certain ways to change the way that the light's reflecting into wherever you've put the person. But once you've got a reflector, let's say you're doing a shot and you want that golden hour light. You really, really want that golden hour light. So you put the person back so that they're in the shade, but they're outside because you want it to look like an outside golden hour shot. So you've got them tucked near a tree, for example. Now you can set lighting up, LED lighting especially, and crank it up so that you've got that golden color to it. Make it bright, and you can do that to simulate golden hour. Or the cheaper way to do it, but still as viable and maybe a little bit easier to do, is to have golden reflectors. Again, like I said, they're not expensive. I think you're going to get a pack for about $20, but you're going to have stands, and you're going to have clamps. If you've ever seen any of the old archaeological movies, or if you've seen The Fifth Element, where they used reflectors to bounce light down shafts so they could see what they were doing while they worked because they didn't have any other way to do it, that's what you're doing here. So you may be going from reflector to reflector to reflector, and you can play if you're doing that, right? If you're shooting and the sun is more toward the back or off to one side, you don't have to use all golden reflectors. What if you used a white reflector, right? So the first reflector that the sun hits is that white reflector, and then that bounces it off a golden reflector, which then bounces it onto the person. Cuts down the amount of gold, right? If you're going gold to gold to gold, then you're increasing that yellowish tinge to everything. So you may want to have some other colored reflectors in there to offset that if you're going to do that kind of pattern. But again, you're coming up with something very creative, very different than what anybody else has done. Now, you can have people hold the reflectors for you, obviously. Just like I said, Fifth Element, they had the kids holding the reflectors up. They'd fall asleep. They have to wake the kid up so the reflector's back where it's supposed to be. But you can use people for that purpose. But if you're using people for it, you might have to pay for people. Just saying. So, getting some light stands, because they have that nice screw on top piece on the top, and they're adjustable in height, would allow you to then screw a clamp onto it, clamp your reflector in place, and then you can move the reflectors around and bounce that light however you want. And you can come up with some really creative patterns in both how the light goes, the angle that it hits the person, the colors that you use. Think of the differences that you could use with the colors. Now, most of the reflectors that I've seen are white and gold. Not too many of the other types. So you're just kind of bouncing between white and gold. But you can add other things into your mix as well. Again, something to have to hold it, but if you had a sheer material, right, like a sheer drape type material or a sheet, the sheet could be put in between the subject and the reflected light and work as a softbox, softening that light, making that more of a golden glow that's hitting everything, not just the one spot where the reflector's hitting, right? And you can come up with some really creative lighting without having to have lights. And without having to work in a studio, and without being cramped inside a box someplace that you got all your lighting set up and you're limited to what you can do and where you are. Here, you're portable. You can go anywhere you want to go. You're outside. Find a good spot. Get your subject in line. Get those reflectors all set up and see what you can create. See what new thing you can come up with. And you can do that now, practicing using the snow as a reflector, and then go from there. It'll help fertilize your creativity going into spring and summer. When it's warmer, People will have less clothing on when they're outside, so they're not bundled up in great big coats. And you come up with some really interesting photographs. And that's what I got for you guys this week. I will talk to you all next week.